Welcome back to GH Updates, your go-to spot for all the drama, revelations, and explosive secrets from General Hospital. Buckle up, because the episode airing on Monday, June 2nd, 2025, is nothing short of a seismic shakeup in Port Charles. Let's break it all down. General Hospital will reveal. As the custody battle between Michael and Willow reached a boiling point, tension rippled through every corner of the courtroom and beyond. What appeared Tobe, a straightforward legal struggle over the future of Wei and Amelia, began to tag on the scent of something far more sinister. Behind the closed doors, away from the public eye and the passionate testimonies, a darker truth began to emerge. One that would shake the foundation of the case and expose hidden rot in a seemingly principled fight. And the first to catch the scent of betrayal wasn't the legal team or Reverend Michael himself, but Jason. Unlike others who remained focused on emotional apples or courtroom strategy, Jason had a different instinct, years of operating in the shadows, balancing morality with survival, had honed his ability to sense deception, even when it was carefully wrapped in sincerity. From the moment Drew began making overly confident assurances to Willow that she would not lose her children, Jason felt something was off. These weren't merely words of encouragement from a hopeful partner. They were guarantees delivered with that kind of certainty no honest man could make in the face of an unpredictable legal system. Drew wasn't just hoping to win. He was certain, and that certainty required off manipulation. Jason kept his observations to himself. At first, he tended hearings, watched Drew's body language, and listened carefully to Torik's evolving legal tactics. Something had shifted dramatically between the initial petition and the latest filings. Subtle legal maneuvers that signaled outside influence. Jason began to dig through connections had maintained over the years within law enforcement and private intelligence. He quietly initiated a background probe into Drew's recent movements and communications. What he discovered only deepened his suspicions. Drew had recently met with a retired federal judge, someone whose influence within state judiciary hadn't completely faded. The judge had previously been censured for questionable political donations, but remained connected to advisory roles and discreet consultation. Digging deeper, Jason found that the judge's financials had changed abruptly. A large sum of money had been deposited into a discretionary trust registered offer, the ownership of which washed through a maze of shell corporations. Jason followed the money, tracing its origins to a holding company in the Caymans. There, embedded in the fine print of quarterly transfers, was a quiet transaction from an entity Drew had once invested in heavily during his time away from Port Charles. Jason was no stranger to laundering tactics and financial ambition. He knew exactly what he was seeing. This wasn't just a coincidence, it was a payoff. Realizing the magnitude of the corruption, Jason turned to the only person he trusted, who also had a stake in this fight. Carly. Her history with Drew had left a bitter aftertaste, and her loyalty to Michael and the Corinthos family remained unshaken. Together, they coordinated an evidence-gathering mission that pulled together threads from multiple angles. Carly used her business network to obtain insider bank documents. Jason deployed former intelligence execs to track Drew's meetings and encrypted communication. Rectiazon. Records restes, records relive sility since news and reld. May me accord. Well, since you've spent up, may me worst, to the maist of love. We seeth loss, we see my lev, we are lie to see we are. We see me in our cad, we are at my bell to said. Came you to see you so saw wime. We see you so bait we do you sick I play you so segregate with likes it to crack it to be lead to guide to weekly it to go it to kid to hit to let ancestors read because it what's it's paying to pick the pick we guys it was the pick these updated. Each clue led them closer to the core of the operation. Drew was attempting to buy justice under the guise of fighting for love. But what transformed the investigation from suspicion to undeniable truth was a recording Jason obtained from a disillusioned bank executive who had recently been forced to resign. The former banker, seeking revenge and absolution, had secretly recorded a call with Drew in which he explicitly requested that a series of anonymous transfers be processed in a way that could not be traced to him or anyone involved in the trial. The recipient Aftho's funds. The same retired judge who had recently been spotted in a closed-door luncheon with members of the judicial panel overseeing the Gorski case. This damning audio evidence, combined with the trail of shell accounts, transaction logs, and Drew's suspicious political meetings, formed a web of corruption that could no longer be ignored. Jason and Carly packaged the materials and approached Diane, who had just returned from a court recess. They briefed her quickly but thoroughly, and she immediately filed a motion to introduce newly discovered evidence on the grounds of potential judicial misconduct. The courtroom atmosphere shifted violently. When Diane presented the evidence before the judge, gasps fell at the gallery as the audio played. Drew's voice, calm and deliberate, negotiating silence and influence. Willow sat frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. Unable to reconcile the man she thought was fighting for her with the calculating figure exposed bore her. Michael turned away, jaw clenched, threat of betrayal pressing on his shoulders even as justice inched back into the light. The presiding judge hadn't a choice but to suspend the current proceedings and call for a full ethics review. In a scathing interim ruling, she invalidated any previous influential advice given by the compromised former judge and ordered Drew to be investigated for bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to manipulate the outcome of a legal proceeding. Rick, though not directly implicated, withdrew from the case under intense scrutiny, and Willow was left in emotional ruin, conflicted, devastated, and questioning every decision she had made since aligning herself with Drew. Jason's role line unearthing. The conspiracy remained largely in the background. He had no interest in credit, no desire for praise. What mattered to him was that Michael way, and Amelia would no longer pawns in Drew's twisted game. For Jason, it was never just about winning. It was about ensuring that power, wealth, and deceit could not be Alouetto, rewrite the rules of justice. Especially not at the expense of children and those who loved them unconditionally. As the courtroom emptied and the media swarmed to cover the sensation downfall of Drew Kane, Jason watched it from the shadows, quietly fading into the background once again, his mission complete. He left behind a justice system slightly more intact than he had found it, and a family closer to healing. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned, and for once, truth had won not by persuasion, but by exposure. When Jason finally submitted the meticulous Locke-Malatant dossier to Diane, a new chapter in the custody trial was about to unfold, one that none of the parties had anticipated, and certainly not Drew. Jason's investigation had culminated in a cache of documents, digital records, and a damning audio recording that pointed to a deliberate scheme of bribery and judicial manipulation. Diane, known for her razor-sharp intellect and unwavering courtroom presence, immediately recognized the explosive potential of what had been placed in her hands. Wasting no time, she filed an emergency motion to reopen proceedings, citing newly uncovered evidence of criminal conduct directly tied to the integrity of the ongoing case. The court, sensing the gravity of the claims, scheduled a closed but expedite hearing to evaluate the materials. Word spread quickly, and by the time the court reconvened, the atmosphere was tense and electric. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Present were not only the involved parties, but also figures who had remained peripheral until now. Willow, pale and visibly shaken. Sasha, curious and conflicted. Men, icy and unreadable, and a small crowd of legal aides, reporters, and concerned family members. That presiding judge, a woman known for her nonsense approach and deep respect for legal ethics, entered with a sense of grim purpose. She made it clear this was not a continuation of the custody proceedings, but a preliminary herringon. Serious allegations that cold retifying everything the court had considered thus far. Diane rose with poise and began presenting the findings. She laid out the framework of Jason's investigation. How inconsistencies in assurances had raised red flags. How financial anomalies tied to a Cayman-based shell corporation had led to the discovery of unreported payments. And how the involvement of a retired federal judge with active political influence implicated a broader web of unethical behavior. But it was when Diane queued up the audio recording that the entire courtroom seemed to freeze in place. As the playback began, Drew's voice filled the room, calm, transactional, methodical. There was no mistaking it. He was heard instructing a banker to process a series of anonymous transfers to a third-party trust with direct mention of ensuring favorable influencio or a court ruling. There was no emotion in his tone, only cold calculation. Murmurs rippled across the courtroom. The judge's expression hardened with each passing second of their courting. Willow's hands trembled in her lap. Her breath catching audibly asked man. She had defended and loved was laid bare as a manipulator of justice. Drew, seated beside Rick, went rigid, his face drained of color, his jaw clenched so tightly it seemed on the verge of cracking. Rick, meanwhile, looked blindsided, his eyes darting between Diane, the judge, and Drew, Asif, silently, questioning whether he had just been made an unwitting accomplice in something much darker than legal ambition. There was no room left for Danielle. The clarity of the evidence stripped Drew of any plausible defense. The judge called for silence and addressed the courtroom with a stern, composed tone that carried unmistakably She confirmed that the evidence warranted immediate judicial review and referred Drew to the district attorney's office for investigation on charges of bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to pervert the course of a legal proceeding. As gasps sejoed around the room, she went further. She declared all motions and petitions filed on Willow's behalf to be tainted by potential misconduct. Rick's entire line of legal argumentation was nullified. Then came the final blow. With unwavering decisiveness, the judge stripped the case of its previous complexity and issued a definitive ruling, citing Michael's long-term parental involvement, stability, and absence of misconduct. She affirmed that Michael would retain full legal and physical custody of both Y and Amelia. No further evaluation would be required unless the state deemed it necessary following the criminal inquiry into Drew's conduct. A silence fell again, this time deeper, heavier. Willow sat frozen in her chair, her world collapsing inward. The betrayal was more than just legal, it was personal. She had placed her trust, her hope, her future in the hands of a man who had proven not only manipulative but morally bankrupt. Beside her, Sasha reached out instinctively, unsure whether to offer comfort or simply anchor someone who looked as though she might shatter a tiny moment. Michael didn't gloat, hadn't even smile. His expression was Sun Ofek's Haustion of a father who had fought too long to protect his children and had lost too much in the process to celebrate a victory. This tainted. He looked toward Jason, who stood at the back of the courtroom, arms crossed, a shadow off indication in his otherwise stoic demeanor. Their eyes met briefly. No words were exchanged, but understanding passed between them. Jason had done what no one else could, piercing through theplished lies and revealing the rot beneath. As the courtroom emptied, Drew remained, seated, flanked by two officers waiting the formal booking process. He didn't speak. His silence was no longer tactical, but hollow. The absence of a man who once wielded power with confidence and now sat alone among heroines of his deceit. The echo of his betrayal would haunt not just the courtroom, but every relationship he had poisoned in his pursuit of control. Jason, meanwhile, slipped out quietly, not waiting for thanks or recognition. His mission was complete, and the truth at long last had spoken for itself. The downfall of Drew was no slow unraveling. It was swift, brutal, and left nothing intact. Within mere hours of the courtroom revelation, the news of his bribery scandal spread like wildfire through Port Charles and beyond, reaching the polished corridors of state offices, the boardrooms off corporate giants, and the private lounges of political elites who, on so considered, drew a valuable ally. Thasuhu had once pledged their loyalty to him in hushed conversations and lucrative backroom deals, now recoiled insolence. Severing ties in self-preservation, his phone went unanswered. Snurred. Those who owed him favors no longer returned. Them, political contacts vanished behind closed doors. And the vast financial web he had constructed carefully curated investment portfolios over cessets. Confidential lobbying engines froze into an untouchably void as firms distanced themselves from Scandal, his empire once built on a blend of charm, strategic influence, and a carefully maintained facade of moral righteousness, crumbled down to the weight of undeniable truth. Investment accounts were suspended. Shares were pulled. His name, once whispered with respect and calculated fear, became synonymous with disgrace. Public opinion turned vicious. Media outlets tore apart his carefully rehearsed rod, and social platforms echoed with a storm of betrayal and anger. But most devastating collapse wasn't measured in dollars or headlines. It weighs look on Willow's face, in the aftermath of the hearing, as Theckertrum's energy fizzled into stunted silence. Willow collapsed into herself. Her body remained upright, but her spirit crumpled under the devastation. She had risked everything: her reputation, her future, her identity as a mother on a man who had manipulated her with a manufactured illusion of love and loyalty. What shattered her wasn't just betrayal of trust. It was the horrifying realization that she had come upon in Drew's calculated her set of control. She had believed in him. She had defended him. She had closed her eyes to the subtle warnings from those around her. And now the cost-off that faith had been laid bare before the world. Jason didn't stand in the spotlight. He never did. As that courtroom emptied and reporters surged forward with questions and flashbulbs, he stepped into the shadows without ceremony. But Michael saw him. Standing with Wei, clinging to one arm, and Amelia nestled in the other. Michael crossed the courtroom with quiet purpose and draped his free arm around Jason in a rare, unspoken moment of raw gratitude. No words were needed. Michael understood the depth of what Jason hadn't. The sacrifices made, the silence or violence, the relentless pursuit of truth, not for glory, but for justice. Thanks to Jason, the children would grow up in an environment free from manipulation, deceit, and the toxic influence of unchecked ambition. The courtroom had ruled in Michael's favor, but the victory belonged as much to Jason as to any legal argument. Yet, even in triumph, the scars ran deep. For Willow, the emotional wounds bled silently beneath the surface. In the days that followed, she would struggle to reconcile the image of the man she once loved with the predator unmasked in court. Every memory became a question mark. Every gesture retroactive liquored with suspicion. Grief, shame, and guilt tangled together, and the path to healing was neither straight nor guaranteed, though Michael offered her kindness and space. And though Sasha and even Na, humbled by the ordeal, attempted to reach out, Willow often sat alone, in the silence of what could have been. Meanwhile, Drew faced a maelstrom of consequences. A formal investigation was launched, and charges of bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy loomed large. He was stripped of all businesslessness, removed from corporate boards, and blacklisted from any legitimate approach Teal network. Custody. Rights evaporated in the wake of the judge's ruling, and with each passing day, Drew found himself more isolated, more reviled. The fall from grace weighs absolute. He who once walked with confidence through the highest circles of influence was now a pariah. His name invoked only as a cautionary tale for against and corruption. Jason, having done what needed to be done, returned to the life he knew best, quiet, measured, and fair, removed from the chaos he had temporarily stepped into. He wasn't looking for redemption or recognition. For him, justice was a duty, not a destination. He had simply exposed the truth that others had refused to see. His departure was as quiet as his arrival, but the impact of his actions lingered like a skew, like a permanent echo, a silent promise that no matter how deep liberated, the truth always finds its way to the surface. And this time, it had not only shattered a fraudulent empire, but had liberated a family from the invisible chains of deceit. The children, and Amelia, would never know the full extent of what had been ended for them, but they would live lives safeguarded by a just as hard one. Andrew, once a master of manipulation, had been undone, not by rage or revenge. What a whirlwind of emotion, betrayal, and bombshell revelations. Monday's episode promises to change the lives of Port Charles residents forever. Will Michael recover from Sasha's revelation? Will Nina's secrets destroy her credibility? And is this really the end for Curtis and Portia? One thing's for sure, General Hospital is just getting started. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to GH Updates for your daily dose of drama. We'll be right here, bringing you every twist, every turn, and every unforgettable moment. Until next time, stay tuned, Port Charles fans.